Senator Bernie Sanders says that he is the winner of Iowa, even though Iowa Democrats have yet to award a winner. Instead, they say that they will recanvass the caucus. But Sanders is making the winner claim as he tries to persuade New Hampshire voters to turn out for him on Tuesday. A new Monmouth University poll puts Sanders in the lead in New Hampshire. Pete Buttigieg, the other possible winner of the Iowa caucuses, is 4 points behind in New Hampshire. CBS News campaign reporter Nicole Sganga is in Concord. Nicole, you've actually been living there in New Hampshire for the last 8.5 months, watching how things have been changing there. How is New Hampshire really preparing for Tuesday, given all the chaos there in Iowa?
Well, I'm currently standing outside the state capitol building, and New Hampshire state officials just gave a briefing to reassure the public that the New Hampshire primary is in good hands. And they had 3 major points to make. One, this is a primary, not a caucus, so it's very simple. Voters cast their ballots on Election Day, February 11th. Those ballots are casted and counted, and hopefully we will have a winner on the same night. 2, this primary is run by the state, not the party. So state officials have been doing this for literally a century, and no party officials are involved in the running of the New Hampshire primary. And 3, finally, no apps are involved in this election. So it's very simple, and for the most part, voters just cast their ballots. Now, the New Hampshire Governor, Chris Sununu, said, "I promise you we will get it right." He made that commitment before a sea of cameras. In addition, we should point out that New Hampshire is going to send 50 lawyers, election officials, officials from the Attorney General's office to all of the polling locations throughout election night. They'll be patrolling to make sure that there are no problems whatsoever. So really just trying to encourage the public and let them know that things are business as usual here in New Hampshire.
I heard maybe a little bit of shade being thrown by some of the New Hampshire officials towards Iowa, saying we use the regular old paper, we don't have an app, we're going to do fine on Tuesday night. How are voters on the ground being affected by the results that we're now finally starting to get from Iowa? I mentioned that Bernie Sanders, who's polling very well there, has in fact claimed the mantle of the winner, even if maybe others haven't given it to him yet. Is that helping him?
Well, after the Iowa caucus on Tuesday, I spoke to about 24 voters, trying to get a sense of if any of them were thrown off by what happened in Iowa. And I think one voter put it nicely when he said to me, "We've always discounted Iowa." And so I don't think many New Hampshire voters who tend to have a little bit of a chip on their shoulders about the primary here, the first in the nation primary, are very concerned with what is happening in the Midwest right now. Certainly the candidates have been visiting New Hampshire over the past year. The voters have been going to those events. They've been watching the debates. They've been actively speaking with campaign organizers, knocking on their door, and they're going to make their own decision about this. You'll recall that in 2016, while Iowa voted for Secretary Hillary Clinton, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders won here in New Hampshire by a whopping 20 points. And that certainly means that he's going to have a lot to prove this time around. He has the biggest staff that we know of on the ground here in New Hampshire, over 150 staffers here on the ground who have been knocking on doors over the past weeks and truly months. And so certainly he declared victory today, and we'll see what happens come Tuesday.
Yeah, you mentioned 2016. I know that in Iowa it was neck and neck between Sanders and Hillary Clinton, with Sanders just barely eking out that win in Iowa. It's perhaps more troubling for the former vice president, Joe Biden. He took a, quote, gut punch in Iowa. He's trying to make a comeback hard in New Hampshire. Is he doing anything in particular there on the ground to give himself an edge?
Well, the former vice president hosted nearly 24 events in Iowa over the course of the month of January, but he only really visited the Granite State here once. So he's playing a lot of catch up. Now, he has a lot of really good surrogates in this state, including former New Hampshire Governor John Lynch, who has been knocking on doors for him, quite literally, talking to voters, doing campaign canvas launches in the weeks approaching the New Hampshire primary. But the former vice president also has something going going against him, which is that he's largely not been running any television ads in this state. You know, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders, businessman Tom Steyer, entrepreneur Andrew Yang have really flooded the digital and TV airspace with their advertisements. But Joe Biden has been largely dark here in the state of New Hampshire. We've heard reporting that his super PAC will be putting up about $900,000 worth of ads in New Hampshire this week. So certainly trying to give him the boost that he says he so desperately needs. He's been saying that he will be the comeback kid here in New Hampshire, alluding to what happened to former President Bill Clinton when he was running in 1992 here in New Hampshire. We'll see if he can truly make that kind of comeback.
Yeah, and I imagine that they're going to be using the debate stage tomorrow to try and make that case of Biden in particular. But also, I'm wondering about Elizabeth Warren. I'm wondering about Pete Buttigieg. Which candidates do you see there really needing to make a good impression and counting on the debate stage to get it done?
Well, that's exactly it. And we should point out that around half of New Hampshire voters tell us, based on recent polling, that they're still making up their minds. And so certainly this debate is going to be a really important one for certain candidates. You do have, as you mentioned, Senator Elizabeth Warren from neighboring Massachusetts. She's put a lot of chips in this basket here in New Hampshire. She's a very well-operated team here in New Hampshire who's been knocking on doors. She was surging here over the summer, the clear front runner in this state, and then took a dip come winter. So certainly she is looking to stand out after, an unsatisfactory finish, in Iowa. Also, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, as you mentioned, he's got a big team here in New Hampshire. He's committed a lot of resources here, done a lot of relational organizing, house parties here in the Granite State. So he'll be looking to make a splash before he goes to Nevada and South Carolina, two states that are going to be harder for him to stand out in if recent polling is true.
Real quick, what about Andrew Yang and the Yang Gang? I see that there's some reports that some of his top leadership has been fired following the Iowa caucus heading right now into New Hampshire. How important is New Hampshire for his campaign?
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out because Andrew Yang has been here from the very beginning. He started campaigning in New Hampshire about 2 years ago and has been doing campaign event after campaign event really in the months leading up to the New Hampshire primary. Now, something he had against him in Iowa is that the way the caucuses work, you need to reach a 15% threshold in order to get viability in that caucus. Otherwise, then, of course, during the realignment, your supporters have to go elsewhere. Here in New Hampshire, that threshold really does not exist when it comes to voting in the polling booth. So he's looking to see if he can make a splash, perhaps beat expectations when people just show up independently, cast their ballots on their own and, don't have to reach that threshold or deal with the caucus system here. It's also a lot easier to organize in a state like New Hampshire where you can just knock on doors. You don't have to choose captain precincts and things of that nature. So New Hampshire has always rewarded candidates who have spent a lot of time in the state, even underdogs or lesser known candidates like, President Jimmy Carter back in 1976, Colorado Senator Gary Hart in 1984. The list goes on and on.
You know your history.
Certainly Andrew Yang looking to, looking to make a splash here, looking to follow in those footsteps.
Nicole Sganga, thank you so much.
Thank you.